Hi, everyone. I am here today with Keri Marshall. I am very excited to interview her and talk a little bit about recovery and the aspects of recovery with her. Keri, you have concentrated so much of your career around health, wellness, sports nutrition. You have such an impressive background. Give us an overview of your path to being a naturopathic doctor and as the co-founder of Virtue Health Solution.
Yeah, thanks, Elise, and thanks for having me today. As you mentioned, I've had a long history, both in clinical research and the dietary supplement industry, and as a integrative practitioner as a naturopath. So, 30 years ago, I actually started work in the Women's Health Initiative, which is the largest clinical study of all times for women. And they looked at hormone replacement therapy, but they also had a big nutrition arm to do with calcium and vitamin D supplementation and also fat manipulation in the diet. And it's interesting because 20 years of my career, I've actually spent in the fat industry or lipids, specifically with omega 3s. And it's funny because we're still crunching data from that Women's Health Initiative and how it's impacted healthy aging and long term health and brain health and even overall mortality. So, kind of call that study the gift that keeps giving. Because we've learned a lot about bone health. And, that plays in a lot too with sports recovery, too, especially for women as we age. So yeah, 25 years in the supplement industry. I've worked for a number of different companies and a number of different nutrients and some botanicals too. And I've also been a lifelong athlete, still competing myself. I have a race this weekend. So this has always been something super important to me.
Yeah, and I love when I interview people that have that connection of the clinical side, the research, the science. I know you've been worked with ingredient companies before and finished product companies before. So it's nice to have that whole 360-degree picture of, the whole industry, and excited to dive in with you. So let's talk about athletes in general and the big picture. Tell us why it's important to tailor recovery. I mean, we hear a lot about muscle pump and pre-workout and finishing the race and winning the race. But talk to us about the big picture of why athletes should have that part of their goals of recovery and part of their big picture goal when it comes to exercise.
Yeah, that's a great place to start because, presumably and hopefully you're not just, going hard for one big race and then you're going to call it quits, right? Like exercise should be a normal part of our everyday life. If we want to be healthy and stay healthy, you don't have to be training for a race or a specific event to be exercising. So I really want to put that in context. It's not about one big thing and then stopping. So recovery should be something we do every time we're exercising, every time we go to the gym, every time we go for a run, even every time we do a yoga class or Pilates. We're still using muscles, we're using muscle energy, and our bodies, when even just, simple things with like stretching, and we're stretching fibers in our body and connective tissue. And all of that tissue, the connective tissue, the tendons, the ligaments, the muscles, it's all made of protein and fat and a number of other macronutrients that we put in our diet. So our daily diet, I hate the word diet because it's, again, not something you should just do for a short term and then go back to your happy diet. It's something that we should all be, working towards maintaining a healthy whole foods diet. We hear that term all the time, but it's that simple, not eating processed foods or trying not to eat out a lot, but also really understanding, macronutrient intake is really a fundamental part of exercise recovery, specifically with fat and protein. Women, as we age, we actually need more protein so that we don't have sarcopenia or muscle loss on the other side. Because part of that recovery is making sure that we can keep our muscles built up and not losing muscle mass because we're not putting the right amount or the right type of nutrients in our body that we need to recover.
Yeah, and I think it's not even just about athletes, right? It's just people in general that are exercising. Like, I know I'm the biggest culprit. I go to the gym, I rush out, I got to get the kids from school, I got to go to the supermarket, and I'm not doing enough to recover. So I know you talked about macronutrients. There's, the delayed onset of muscle soreness, right? There's things like that. When it comes to recovery, is there anything else, like, as far as like women in general? We did a big piece on women, at the one of our very first pieces about moods and move nutrition and the lack of research in women in sports and the lack of research specifically on women. But is there anything like that's unique about women? There was a lot of in that piece about talking about menopause and things like that. But when it comes to recovery for women, I know you said, reducing the risk of sarcopenia, the muscle loss, but anything else for women as far as like recovery that we should aim towards or gear ourselves toward when, even if it like supplementation recommendations, diet recommendations, things like that for women?
Yeah. Well, the biggest difference between men and women is going to be the amount of estrogen and progesterone. And for women of reproductive age, it's going to be a cyclic pattern, right? Like certain hormones are going to be higher certain times a month. And as a result, a woman's body is going to be more inflamed at a certain time of month. And it's, typically that week right before the menstrual cycle starts, where, progesterone levels are beginning to fall. And, after, presumably if you didn't get pregnant, progesterone falls and then your body gets ready to have a cycle. And that's a very inflammatory part of the month for a woman. And so it might hurt a little bit more when she's exercising. So really making sure hormone levels are balanced. And if there are other symptoms of PMS, is really just kind of trying to address those. When you're in perimenopausal menopause, though, of course, we have estrogen and progesterone levels dropping. Progesterone levels actually drop first during menopause or perimenopause, and then estrogen follows. So that comes with a whole new set of issues in terms of trying to manage things differently, because so many things in a woman's body changes with those drops in hormone levels. And that includes like tissues and connective tissue and muscle. And that's why it's so much harder to maintain muscle mass after we go through menopause. And that's why it's that important to eat protein. So we'll start with protein. We'll switch to fat too, because we could talk about macronutrients all day. We're going to have to talk about some of the micronutrients a little bit too, because those are critically important. But,
For sure.
protein, some of my favorite sports dietitians that are women and, women that are postmenopausal, they're really talking about getting up to 100 grams a day of protein, which is a lot. I get really psyched. I can get my patients or my friends or my, colleagues that I paddle with or friends that I paddle with to eat 80 grams. Like you can get 80 grams, great. But if you're working really hard and 5 days a week or more, you better be hitting that 80-gram mark or you're not going to be able to recover. Your muscles will not be able to sustain. And in particular, this is where we'll get into that vegetarian, vegan, animal protein, the branched chain amino acids. People talk about those all the time. Isoleucine, leucine, and valine. They're much, much, much higher in animal-based foods. They just are. There's a couple of plant-based foods. Chickpeas is actually one of my favorites. Chickpeas, by the way, is a really important part of the Mediterranean diet and even the Blue Zone diets. So definitely eat lots of chickpeas for those branched chain amino acids, especially if you're a vegetarian or vegan.
So we're talking about the importance of proteins. And, one of the topics that is, I'm hearing a lot about are the branched chain amino acids. So can you talk about a little bit about the branched chains and why those are important to incorporate into the diet?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what those are to begin with. So the primary ones are isoleucine, leucine, and valine. And they have a branched side chain of carbon molecules. And the reason that's important is that those are really readily available for energy conversion when we're doing intense exercise. And so when you have more branched chain amino acids present in foods, then you have more ability to readily convert that for muscle energy utilization. And so that helps with the breakdown of muscle cells on the other side of exercise also. And so branched chain amino acids are primarily found in animal-based protein foods. And, so things like eggs, really high, chicken, fish, beef, anything like that, even yogurt. So that's where, there's some challenges with a vegetarian or vegan diet to make sure you can get enough. And that's where protein powders can really come into play. Whey protein powder is an excellent source of branched chain amino acids. One of my favorite vegetarian sources, though, is chickpeas. And chickpeas are also a super important part of the Mediterranean diet, and they can also be found in the diet of a few places in the blue zones as well. So those are the folks who are living past 100 at a really healthy, long age, kind of defining what longevity looks like. So eat lots of chickpeas if you're a vegetarian or not even a vegetarian, but really focus on making sure that you're trying to get up to about 80 to 100 grams of protein a day if you're working out for 5 or more days a week.
Yeah, so it sounds like for women, it's definitely about recognizing what stage you're in. But, for everybody, it's really about getting the right amount of protein in the diet for recovery, too. That's a big part of it. That's the big picture of it as well. Any other, like, as far as the macronutrients, anything else you can expand on there? As far as like fats, for example?
Yeah, well, fats is my favorite topic to talk about. So the quality of fat and what you put in your diet is critically important. If anyone can remember in the first day of biology, everyone had to take high school biology to graduate. So the difference between a plant cell and an animal cell is that a plant cell is a single membrane, whereas an animal cell is a double phospholipid membrane. And so fat is part of every single cell within the human body. So the type of fat you put in your diet, if it's saturated or trans fat, that's going to be very stiff, impermeable fat. But if you have those polyunsaturated long-chain fatty acids like omega-3s, then you have more double bonds and you have more fluid and flexibility in there so that nutrients can get into the cells and waste can come out. And it also helps with cell-to-cell communication. So if you're, playing a tennis game or pickleball and you're trying to, focus on the ball coming over the net and when to coordinate that motion of hitting the ball, you need to have really good cell-to-cell communication going on in your brain connecting to the muscles in your arms to be able, to make that connection. So really ensuring that fat quality in your cell membranes is going to be critically important. But also fat as a macronutrient, when we're doing more endurance type activities or longer term activities, we go through a process in our body called beta oxidation, which is the utilization of fat for energy sources. So that's where it's really important to have high quality fats in our diet so that we make sure when we're at a certain part of our exercise, we have those energy sources to utilize. So on the other side to exercise, we really need to make sure we're getting that protein and fat back into our body so we can prepare for the next day or a couple days later when we go and exercise again. So that's part of recovery. It's just making sure those nutrients are a regular part of your diet. The other important thing about... Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, the other important thing about fat, that's when I talk about quality of fat and even those long chain polyunsaturated fats, is there's 3 primary omegas that we talk about: omega-3, omega-6, and omega-9. Omega-9 is things like olive oil. So super important. Those are our monounsaturated fats. But in terms of the polyunsaturated fats, we have 2 primary ones, omega-3s and 6s. The 6s come from plant seed oils, things like corn, soy, canola, safflower. And those are very inflammatory. And unfortunately, those are a huge part of the standard American diet. And so what happens when we do exercise, or even we maybe overdo exercise, maybe we strain too much at the gym lifting weights or something one day, or even we, our knee or our ankle is hurting after a long run, or shoulder after a long swim, you need to recover from that. And that's only going to be dependent upon how your body is able to react and respond to inflammation. So when you have a site of injury or soreness in the body, we release a number of inflammatory mediators, and those immune cells migrate to the affected area. But the response and the reaction is going to be based on the type of fat that lives in the cell membrane. And that's going to be based on if there's omega-3, which are anti-inflammatory, or omega-6 fats, and they compete for each other. And, not to get too much into the biochemistry of that today, but it's literally a competition between those 2 fats, and whichever one you have more of is how your body will respond in terms of, a systemic, and then, hopefully a long-term inflammation resolution rather than long-term chronic inflammation. Because if the body is in an imbalance with more omega-6s and not enough omega-3s, this is how we become inflamed long term. And so that's
Yeah,
part.
and I think it's like the overall picture is just putting better quality, high quality fats into your body and recognizing what those are versus like what probably most Americans are eating, which are probably not the right ones, right? So recognizing the right ones to help with things like inflammation, to help with the recovery, to probably help with things like cardiovascular disease as well, too, right? So there's a slew of things that the omega-3s, for example, are going to help not just in the recovery, but it's a whole overall picture of the health and wellness. And that was, I read some of your articles on, omega-3s in women, omega-3s in kids. So it's not just about the athlete, right? It's the overall picture of the American diet and any diet.
Well, the brain is 60% fat. So let's just stop right there and think about that, okay? Just like more than half of the brain is fat. So think about the type of fat you put in your diet will literally make up more than half your brain. So in a perfect world, 40% of that 60 should be the omega-3 DHA. And so DHA is like a foundational building block. Think of it like a brick in our brain, whereas the EPA modulates inflammation. So one of the studies we actually looked at, it was a snapshot of the American diet. So CDC puts out this NHANES nutritional data, both food frequency and also measuring blood levels. Well, we took some of the data from looking at a snapshot of America, about 5,000 adults and children, and we looked at their omega-3 blood levels, and 95% of kids in the US did not meet even the bare bones for deficiency or, meeting adequate levels, which is about 250 milligrams a day. And 67% or 2/3 of adults in America are not getting enough omega-3s to even prevent deficiency. So we're talking about people that are, in outright deficiency in this state. So if we're talking about every cell membrane in the body and our brains, we're not going to be able to be in a good mood. Melatonin to help us sleep is produced in the pineal gland in the brain. So our sleep is going to be off. So when we looked at those blood levels, we actually correlated it to sleep and depression in 2 different studies that got published. And sure enough, people with lower omega-3 levels had worse sleep. And sure enough, people with lower omega-3 levels had more depression. In fact, they showed that the people with the highest levels of EPA in their blood had an easier time getting along with people. They had higher work productivity, and they had a better quality of life and definitely less depression.
Great. I mean, it's just an overall picture of like health and wellness for sure. So I love that. The last thing I want to ask you is, there's so many emerging different types of demographics, population that are merging into sports nutrition, active nutrition. The one group I want to talk about, and I see my parents even like they're playing pickleball, right? They're out for like longer walks these days because they're realizing the importance of being active and being healthy, right? So you have this aging population, right? The 65 plus, let's call it, maybe even 75 plus at this point, right? That is becoming so much more active in what they're doing. How important is it for them to recover? And how important, and what, is there anything else besides the proteins, the fats? I know they have probably more of a chance of that sarcopenia, that muscle loss, but anything else that you can recommend for that like aging population, and then like what they should consider for recovery?
Yeah, interestingly though, one of the things we see in the aging population is just not getting enough calories in general. So if they are going to be more active, it's literally about replacing the calories. We see some aging people just so thin and frail looking. So that really comes down to cooking and eating at the end of the day. They just tend to eat less, or, we just grabbed a bowl of cereal because it was simple. Well, if you're moving your body more, you just need to generally get nutrients in, but also hydration. And again, not just for old people or people who are aging, but hydration is so critically important because, the body is about 60% water. So we need to replenish that because when we exercise, we sweat, or at least we should be. If you're not, that's a different discussion. But, you're losing water when you're exercising at any level, whether it's a short walk or a 2-hour bike ride. You definitely need to replace that. And, unfortunately, as we age, heart issues and circulation and blood pressure become more of an issue. And so when you're not hydrated, circulation becomes compromised in a number of different ways too. So definitely throw in hydration, as soon as you get home, or, if it's a long walk, bring a water bottle with you, things like that.
This was so great, Keri. I am definitely going to the store. I'm getting some chickpeas, a big piece of fish for dinner tonight. I mean, fresh fish, right? Not farm raised, right? Fresh.
Stay away from the Atlantic salmon and the tilapia.
Um, no,
Farm.
I think this is an important conversation for everybody, not just our audience, as far as like dietitians and sports nutritionists. I think any average consumer can benefit from the conversation that we had today. So I really appreciate you jumping on and talking to us, and hope to have you back sometime soon.
Thanks, Elise. It's great.